abandoned by my dad for his new family. But wait until you hear how I got the ultimate revenge. And it was a cold, gray morning in Hartford when my world fell apart. I was 9 years old, sitting in my mom's favorite armchair, clutching the soft blanket she used to wrap around me when I wasn't feeling well. That was the day we got the news that my mom was gone. I didn't really understand what was happening at first, but the look on my dad's face told me everything. My mom, the person who made everything in my life feel safe and warm, wasn't coming back. For the first few months, my dad and I tried to hold things together. His name is Tom, and back then, he was 36. He worked long hours as a mechanic, but he'd always find time to sit with me at dinner or ask me about my day. We had a routine, broken, but it worked. School, dinner, bedtime stories. We'd both pretend things were normal, but the house felt hollow without Mom. Looking back, I realized those moments were just the calm before the storm. At the time, I thought my dad was doing his best to keep us afloat, but something shifted about a year after Mom passed. That's when Clara entered our lives. I remember the first time I saw her. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was sitting in the living room, reading one of my favorite books. Dad walked in, looking nervous, and behind him was this woman with blonde hair and a bright smile. She looked like she'd just stepped out of one of those TV shows my mom used to watch. Clara. She was 24, a full 12 years younger than Dad, and she seemed so different from anyone I'd ever met. At first, she was nice enough. She brought me little gifts, chocolates, a coloring book, but it felt forced, like she was doing it because she had to, not because she cared. I didn't understand it then, but Clara wasn't interested in getting to know me. She was focused on Dad. Within a few months, she moved in. And she didn't come alone. Along with her suitcases and fancy perfume came Samantha, her 15-year-old daughter. Samantha was everything I wasn't: loud, confident, and spoiled to the core. She walked into the house like it was hers, barely even glancing at me as she lugged her designer bag through the hallway. I thought Clara and Samantha moving in would be an adjustment, but I never expected how much things would change. Clara took over the house almost immediately. The furniture Mom picked out was replaced with sleek, modern stuff that didn't feel like home. The photos of Mom that used to line the walls were packed away, and suddenly, it felt like she'd never existed. Samantha wasn't much better. She acted like the world revolved around her, demanding Clara's attention at every turn. And Clara gave it to her, without hesitation. It didn't take long for me to realize that I wasn't part of their little family. I was an afterthought, a shadow in the background. Dad, who used to sit with me every night and help me with my homework, started spending all his time with Clara. He'd sit on the couch with her, laughing at some movie or holding her hand, while I sat alone in my room. At first, I tried to join in. I'd sit next to them, hoping Dad would invite me to watch or ask me how my day was. But Clara always found a way to push me aside. She'd say things like, "Emily, why don't you go play in your room?" Or, "Sweetheart, you're too young for this movie." Dad never argued. He just nodded and let her take the lead. Samantha wasn't any better. She acted like a queen, and I was her servant. Her room was a disaster. Clothes everywhere, empty snack bags on the floor, and it was always my job to clean up after her. If I didn't do it fast enough, Clara would scold me, telling me I needed to pull my weight in the house. I was 9, for crying out loud. Samantha was 15, more than capable of taking care of her own messes, but no one seemed to care. The worst part was watching Dad change. He wasn't the same man who used to tuck me in at night or cheer me on at school recitals. He became distant, like he was afraid to stand up to Clara. Every time I tried to talk to him about how I felt, he'd brush me off. "Life's not fair, Em," he'd say. "You just have to deal with it." One Christmas stands out more than anything else. That year, Clara decided we'd go on a family vacation to a cabin up in Vermont. I was so excited. I'd never been to the mountains before, and I couldn't wait to spend Christmas with Dad. But then Clara dropped the bomb. I wasn't going. "We can't leave Max here alone," she said, referring to Samantha's hyperactive golden retriever. "Emily can stay and watch him. She's responsible enough." Responsible enough? I was 9. I begged them to take Max to a boarding kennel, but Clara wouldn't hear it. "It's a waste of money," she said. "Emily can handle it. I'll never forget sitting in the living room that Christmas Eve, staring at the tree Dad and I had decorated together. Max barked at every little noise outside, and the house felt colder than it ever had. I wasn't just alone. I was abandoned. That was the moment I realized something had changed forever. Dad wasn't my dad anymore. He was Clara's, and I wasn't part of their family. I was just there. Looking back, I wish I had spoken up more. Maybe if I had, things would have turned out differently. But at 9 years old, I didn't have the words or the courage. I just swallowed my feelings and did what I was told, hoping that someday, things would get better. They didn't. By the time I was 11, the house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a battleground where I was always losing, though the fight was never fair. Clara was the self-declared queen, and Samantha was her spoiled princess. Me? I was just the invisible servant, there to make their lives easier. Clara made it clear that I wasn't her priority. She didn't have to say it out loud. It was in everything she did. If Samantha wanted something, Clara made it happen. If I needed something, it was a we'll see that never materialized. Samantha wanted new clothes? They'd take a trip to the mall. I asked for school supplies? Clara told me to make do with what I had. The worst part was Samantha's constant mess. She left her stuff everywhere. Makeup on the bathroom counter, shoes scattered in the hallway, snack wrappers crumpled on the living room floor. And guess who got to clean it all up? Me. Clara never asked Samantha to lift a finger, even though she was 17 by then. One day, I worked up the courage to ask Clara why Samantha didn't have to help out around the house. Her response was so ridiculous that it still makes me angry to this day. Samantha is older, Emily. She has more important things to focus on, like school and her social life. You'll understand when you're her age. What was I supposed to understand? That being older meant you got a free pass to be lazy? I wanted to tell Clara that I had school, too. That I had things I wanted to do with my friends, if I even had the chance to make any. But I didn't say any of that. I knew it wouldn't matter. My dad didn't help, either. He just sat there, pretending not to notice how unfair everything was. Sometimes, I'd catch him looking at me when Clara gave me a list of chores or scolded me for not folding the laundry perfectly. But he never said anything. He just sat in his chair, watching TV, like it wasn't his problem. One night, I finally tried to talk to him about it. I had just finished cleaning the kitchen while Samantha was on the couch scrolling through her phone. I sat down next to him, my hands still damp from washing dishes. "Dad," I started, my voice shaking a little. "It's not fair that I have to do everything. Why can't Samantha help?" He sighed, not even looking at me. "Life's not always fair, Emily. You just have to deal with it." Those words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Life's not fair? That was all he had to say? I was a kid, still trying to figure out how to live in a world without my mom, and he was telling me to just deal with it? I walked to my room that night feeling more alone than ever. Things got even worse that Christmas. I knew better than to get my hopes up, but a part of me still wished things would be different. I wanted just one Christmas that felt like it used to, back when Mom was alive. But Clara had other plans. They were going to the mountains again, to the same cabin they'd left me behind for 2 years earlier. I overheard them talking about it in the kitchen one evening. Clara was raving about how cozy the cabin was and how much Samantha would love the snow. "What about Emily?" Dad asked, and for a second, I thought maybe he was going to stand up for me. "She can stay here with Max," Clara said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "She did fine last time." I walked in at that moment, hoping to hear something different. "I want to go too," I said. Clara didn't even look at me. "Emily, we've talked about this. Someone has to take care of Max. It's just 3 days. You'll be fine." I turned to Dad, silently begging him to back me up. He just rubbed the back of his neck and mumbled, "It's not a big deal, Em. We'll bring you something nice from the trip." That was the moment I gave up hoping for anything from him. On Christmas Eve, I sat in the living room with Max lying at my feet, staring at the presents under the tree. Most of them were for Samantha. Her name was written in Clara's perfect cursive on every tag. The ones for me were wrapped in cheap paper, like an afterthought. I wondered if Clara had even bothered picking them out, or if she just told Dad to grab whatever was on sale. As Max wagged his tail and nuzzled my hand, I felt a mix of anger and sadness bubbling inside me. This wasn't Christmas. This wasn't family. When they came back, they barely acknowledged me. Samantha went on and on about how amazing the trip was, showing off pictures of snow-covered mountains and the cozy cabin fireplace. Clara praised her for being such a good sport about the cold, saying how proud she was of her. No one asked me how I was. No one cared that I'd spent Christmas alone. It wasn't long after that I realized I couldn't count on Dad anymore. He wasn't going to stand up for me. He wasn't going to fight for me. Clara had taken over, and he was happy to let her. By the time I was 12, I'd stopped trying to please them. I did the chores because I had to, but I didn't put any heart into it. I stopped sitting with them at dinner. I stopped hoping Dad would notice me, but I didn't stop missing my mom. Some nights, I'd sit on my bed and hold the last picture I had of her, the one where she was smiling at me as we sat by the lake. I'd try to remember what it felt like to have someone in my corner, someone who made me feel like I mattered. And every time I thought about her, I'd feel a spark of hope, because even though I didn't have her anymore, I knew there were people in the world who cared. I just hadn't found them yet. The turning point came when Aunt Liz showed up at the door. It was a week after Christmas, the year I turned 12. I hadn't seen her much since Mom passed, but when she heard I'd spent the holiday alone, she drove straight from Boston with my cousin Khloe. When I opened the door, I almost didn't recognize Aunt Liz. She looked so much like Mom, with the same warm smile and kind eyes. Without saying a word, she pulled me into a hug that felt like home. Khloe, who was 15 at the time, stood behind her, holding a bag full of wrapped presents. "Emily," Aunt Liz said, her voice soft but full of determination, "we're here to have a proper Christmas with you." That night, the house felt alive for the first time in years. Aunt Liz and Khloe brought their own traditions with them, cooking a huge dinner, playing card games, and laughing about old family stories. It wasn't the Christmas I had imagined, but it was better than anything Clara and Dad could have given me. Khloe and I stayed up late that night, sitting cross-legged on my bedroom floor, talking about everything. She told me about her school, her friends, and the books she was reading. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like someone wanted to listen to me. "You know," Khloe said, brushing her curly hair out of her face, "what they're doing to you isn't normal." I shrugged. "It's just how it is. Dad says I have to deal with it." Khloe frowned. "That's not right. You're a kid, Emily. You shouldn't have to deal with their messes." I didn't say anything, but her words stayed with me. After that visit, Aunt Liz and Khloe made it their mission to stay in my life. They didn't live close, but they called every week, sent me care packages, and came by whenever they could. Aunt Liz would bring homemade meals and spend hours helping me with school projects. Khloe would take me to the park, to the library, or just out for ice cream. They didn't have to do any of that, but they did. One weekend, when I was 13, they invited me to stay at their house in Boston. I'd never been to a big city before, and I was nervous, but Aunt Liz promised it would be fun. When I got there, I couldn't believe how different their home felt from mine. It was small, but it was full of life. Books stacked on every surface, photos lining the walls, the smell of fresh cookies coming from the kitchen. Aunt Liz made me feel welcome from the second I walked in the door. "You're part of this family, Emily," she said as she handed me a cup of hot cocoa. Always. That weekend, Khloe and I explored the city. We went to the aquarium, saw street performers in the park, and even rode the subway, which was both terrifying and exciting. Khloe treated me like a sister, not a burden. One night, we stayed up late talking, just like we did that first Christmas. I told her everything. How Clara ignored me, how Samantha treated me like a servant, how Dad just let it all happen. "Emily," Khloe said, looking at me with more seriousness than I'd ever seen from her, "you don't have to put up with that. You're worth more than that." I wanted to believe her, but it was hard. Back at home, things didn't change. Clara kept piling on the chores, Samantha kept being Samantha, and Dad kept looking the other way. But something was different in me. I started to see their behavior for what it was, wrong. I stopped caring about Clara's approval. When she scolded me for not vacuuming perfectly, I just nodded and walked away. When Samantha left her messes everywhere, I cleaned them up without a word, but I stopped feeling guilty for resenting it. Instead, I started focusing on school. Aunt Liz and Khloe had inspired me. They made me feel like I was capable of more than just being Clara's scapegoat. I threw myself into my classes, staying up late to study, pouring my frustration into my schoolwork. And it paid off. By the time I was 14, I was one of the top students in my grade. My teachers started noticing and encouraging me to push myself even further. Aunt Liz was thrilled when I told her. She and Khloe came to my school's awards ceremony that year, cheering louder than anyone else when my name was called. Clara didn't even bother to show up. That's when I realized that family isn't about who you're born to. It's about who shows up for you. Aunt Liz and Khloe showed up, time and time again. They didn't have to, but they did. That summer, I spent 3 weeks with them in Boston. It was the best time of my life. Khloe and I explored new parts of the city every day, and Aunt Liz taught me how to cook all my mom's old recipes. Your mom would be so proud of you, Aunt Liz said one night as we made lasagna together. I didn't cry, but my chest ached with the weight of her words. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a family again. Of course, things weren't perfect. I still had to go back to Hartford, back to Clara and Samantha and Dad. But I had a new sense of hope, a feeling that I wasn't as alone as I thought. Whenever things got bad, I'd think about Aunt Liz and Khloe, about the weekends I spent at their house and the love they showed me. It was enough to keep me going, to remind me that I was worth more than the way Clara treated me. Aunt Liz and Khloe didn't just give me a break from the chaos at home. They gave me something to fight for. They gave me a reason to believe that one day, things would get better. And deep down, I knew they would. By the time I was 16, I had learned to keep my head down and stay out of Clara and Samantha's way. It was easier that way. I focused on school, spent as much time as I could at Aunt Liz's house, and stopped trying to win my dad's approval. Somewhere along the line, I realized it wasn't worth the heartbreak. But no matter how hard I tried to stay in my lane, Clara always found a way to make me feel small. If the laundry wasn't folded fast enough, or if Samantha couldn't find one of her shirts, I was to blame. Samantha, now 19 and living at home while she figured things out, acted like she was a queen on vacation, her every whim catered to by Clara. Dad? He was still a ghost in the house. He'd work late shifts and come home too tired to notice or care about what was going on. When I told him once that Clara was pushing me too hard, he gave me the same tired excuse he always did. You're tough, Emily. You'll get through it. That was his answer to everything. It was like he didn't realize, or didn't want to admit, that I shouldn't have had to get through anything. I wasn't tough. I was just tired of being overlooked. Things started to shift my senior year of high school. I worked harder than ever, determined to prove to myself, and maybe even to Dad, that I was more than the maid Clara had turned me into. I poured everything into my studies, staying late at school to finish projects, working with my teachers to prepare for college applications. It paid off. When the acceptance letter arrived from NYU, I couldn't believe it. A full scholarship. It felt like a lifeline, a ticket to escape the prison I'd been living in. I remember standing in the kitchen, holding the letter in my hands. Clara was at the stove, cooking something for Samantha, and Dad was sitting at the table, reading the paper. I got in, I said, my voice trembling. NYU. Full scholarship. Dad looked up, his eyes lighting up for the first time in years. That's incredible, Emily. I'm so proud of you. Clara, on the other hand, barely glanced at me. That's nice, dear, she said, stirring the pot on the stove. But make sure you finish your chores before you go to bed. I walked out of the kitchen, holding the acceptance letter tightly, feeling a mix of triumph and sadness. Even my biggest achievement wasn't enough to make Clara care. As the summer before college went on, I started to see things more clearly. Aunt Liz and Khloe had always told me I deserved better, but it wasn't until I was on the verge of leaving that I finally believed them. I didn't need Clara's approval or Samantha's validation. I didn't even need Dad's pride. I just needed to get out and build a life for myself. The day I moved into my dorm at NYU was one of the best days of my life. Aunt Liz and Khloe came with me, helping me unpack and decorate the tiny space. They hugged me tight before they left, promising to visit soon. You've got this, Emily, Aunt Liz said. We're so proud of you. For the first time in a long time, I believed her. But, of course, Clara and Samantha weren't done with me yet. A few months into my first semester, I got a message from Samantha. Seeing her name on my phone made my stomach turn, but curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Hey, Emily. How's college? Hope you're doing great. I need a favor. I'm struggling with some of my classes and could really use your help. Maybe you could write a few essays for me? You're so good at that stuff. I stared at the screen, reading the message over and over. After everything Samantha had done, ignoring me, treating me like a servant, she had the audacity to ask for my help. I took a deep breath and typed a response. Sorry, Samantha. I'm really busy with my own work. Good luck with your classes. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. It didn't take long for Clara to get involved. A few days later, she called me, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. I heard you're not helping Samantha, she said. That's not very kind of you, Emily. Family helps family. I bit back the anger bubbling in my chest. Family doesn't treat each other the way you and Samantha treated me, I said. I'm not writing her essays, Clara. She's an adult. She can figure it out herself. Clara's tone turned icy. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? You're being selfish. I couldn't help but laugh. Everything you've done for me? Like leaving me behind on vacations? Making me do all the housework? Never once treating me like I mattered? She didn't have a response for that. A few days later, Dad called. He tried to play the peacemaker, as always, asking me to reconsider. Emily, it's just a little help. Samantha's struggling, and you're doing so well. It wouldn't hurt to give her a boost. I sighed. Dad, I've spent my whole life cleaning up after her. I'm not doing it anymore. If she's struggling, that's on her, not me. He didn't argue. He just sighed and said, I'm disappointed, but I understand. That was the last time I spoke to him for a while. For the first time in years, I felt like I had control over my life. I focused on my classes, made new friends, and spent weekends with Aunt Liz and Khloe when I could. They were my family now. The kind of family that showed up, that cared, that made me feel like I belonged. It wasn't perfect. There were moments when I missed Dad, when I wished things had turned out differently, but I knew I had made the right choice. I wasn't going to let Clara and Samantha pull me back into their toxic world. I was finally free. By my final year of college, I was finally feeling like I had a life of my own. I'd worked hard to get to where I was, and for the first time in years, I was proud of myself. Aunt Liz and Khloe had been my biggest supporters through it all, showing up to visit me in New York whenever they could and sending me care packages filled with snacks, handwritten notes, and little reminders of home. I didn't think much about Dad, Clara, or Samantha anymore. After the confrontation over Samantha's essays, I decided to cut ties with them. They didn't call or message me after that, and I figured they had finally gotten the hint. But, of course, nothing stayed quiet for long. It was the middle of finals week when I saw a text from Dad. I hadn't heard from him in months, so the message caught me off guard. It was short and vague, just him asking if we could talk. I stared at the screen for a while, debating whether to respond. A small part of me hoped that maybe he wanted to apologize, to finally acknowledge how much he had let me down. So, against my better judgment, I agreed to meet. We decided on the same coffee shop where we'd met after the Samantha essay incident. When I walked in, he was already there, sitting at a corner table with his hands wrapped around a steaming mug. He looked older, more tired than I remembered. Emily, he said with a faint smile as I sat down. Hi, Dad, I said, keeping my tone neutral. We made small talk for a few minutes, how school was going, what I planned to do after graduation, but I could tell he had something on his mind. Finally, he sighed and looked down at his coffee. It's about Samantha, he said. I felt my stomach tighten. Of course it was. She's in trouble, he continued. She dropped out of school last year, and now she's made some bad decisions. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. What kind of bad decisions? She's racked up a lot of debt, he admitted. Credit cards, loans, that sort of thing. She's staying with us now, but your stepmom and we can't keep bailing her out. It's too much. I knew exactly where this conversation was going, but I decided to make him say it. And what does that have to do with me? Dad looked up at me, his eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in a long time, desperation. We were hoping you could help her out. You've got that new job lined up after graduation, and you're in a better position to give her a hand. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything they had put me through, after years of being treated like I didn't matter, they had the nerve to ask me to bail Samantha out of her mess? Are you serious? I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Emily, she's your sister, Dad said quietly. I slammed my hands on the table, making the mugs rattle. She's not my sister, Dad. She's never been my sister. From the moment Clara and Samantha moved in, you made it clear that I didn't matter. I was the one cleaning up after her, the one left behind while you all went on vacations. And now you want me to save her? No, absolutely not. Dad flinched, but he didn't argue. He just looked down at his coffee again, like he couldn't face me. Do you even hear yourself? I continued. You let Clara and Samantha treat me like I was nothing for years, and now you expect me to just forget all of that and bail her out? It's not happening. There was a long, heavy silence between us. Finally, Dad sighed. I'm sorry, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't realize how much we hurt you. I stared at him, trying to decide if I believed him. It wasn't the apology I had been hoping for, but it was something. I can't fix this for you, I said, my tone softer now. You and Clara made your choices. You chose to put Samantha first. Now you're going to have to live with that. Dad nodded slowly, and for the first time, he looked genuinely remorseful, but it didn't change anything. I stood up, grabbing my bag. I hope you figure things out, Dad, but I'm done being the backup plan. As I walked out of the coffee shop, my chest felt heavy, but there was also a strange sense of relief. I had finally said everything I'd been holding in for years. After that, I didn't hear from Dad again. I graduated a few months later, with Aunt Liz and Khloe cheering me on from the front row. It was one of the happiest days of my life, and I didn't let the absence of my so-called family dampen it. I started my new job in Boston not long after, and Aunt Liz and Khloe helped me settle into my tiny apartment. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I was finally living the life I had dreamed of, free from Clara's rules, Samantha's messes, and Dad's excuses. Every now and then, I'd wonder what had happened to Dad, Clara, and Samantha. Were they still trying to fix Samantha's messes? Had Dad finally realized that he had lost me for good? I didn't know, and honestly, I didn't care. Aunt Liz once told me that family isn't about who you're born to, it's about who shows up. She and Khloe showed up for me in ways Dad never did. They were my real family, the ones who made me feel loved and supported. Looking back, I don't regret walking away from Dad and the life I had with Clara and Samantha. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I had spent too many years being overlooked, undervalued, and ignored. Now, I finally had a chance to build something better, and I wasn't going to waste it. If this story resonates with you, it's time to take action and reclaim your voice. Too often, we let toxic family dynamics define our worth and keep us trapped in cycles of guilt and obligation. But here's the truth. You deserve better. You deserve love, respect, and a sense of belonging with people who show up for you. Not just when it's convenient, but when it truly matters. Start by setting boundaries, no matter how hard it feels. You don't owe anyone your happiness or success, especially not those who failed to stand by you when you needed them most. Remember, family isn't always about blood. It's about the people who make you feel valued and supported. If you're struggling with similar situations, reach out to those who genuinely care about you. Whether it's a trusted friend, an aunt like Liz, or a mentor who believes in you, lean on the people who have your back. And most importantly, focus on building the life you deserve. Invest in your growth, pursue your passions, and never let anyone make you feel like you're less than you are. You are capable, worthy, and strong enough to create your own happiness. If you're ready to take the first step, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Let them know they're not alone, and remind them that they too have the power to walk away from what no longer serves them. Together, we can inspire others to break free and thrive.